ballade, the dream of all pianists, sometimes the nightmare of teachers, caught between the composer and the student to bring the essence of the meaning. And most of the students don't need to be explained to it. They just feel it. That's intuition. That's why you play music. I find that particularly special, that the eloquence of the melodic line in the fourth ballade by Chopin is mostly with insisting repeated notes. And the harmonization highlights it so beautifully. You open the window and all of a sudden you let the morning sunshine come in. It's almost as if the piece introduction welcomes you to the piece which he improvised in salons. And probably because of that, it's a suite of fragments which evolve, develop, and reach the famous coda. And most of the pianists in the world, whenever you enter in a music school, you hear somewhere a practice room echoing the thirds. Because it's so complex to climb those thirds with the thirds chromatically and the fingers climbing on the black keys and sliding from the black keys. And of course all students practice it all the time, and then when they play it through and they have to play it at the end as the moment of final excitement burst of energy, usually it's easily missed. But practiced alone is manageable. But then when it comes for the exercises in rhythms, and the fingering with the escaped 2-5, and then we turn to 2-4. Anyway, everybody finds the way to play it according to their hand. But most of the ballade is not justified only by that driven, though in many ways most exciting and probably uprising the spirits, coda. One can dream and imagine hearing Chopin improvise it. And the notation for the editions that he wrote in several copies, with discrepancies which happen inevitably in this case, willingly or not, or perhaps evolvingly in his ideas, because one thing is to improvise, sometimes you repeat around and you wonder and you're like, anything not his today sounds cheesy, and I take the blame. But is to say that when you write down, obviously like all thoughts, you clear, filter until you reach the essence. And I think he found the simplicity of the repeated note probably originally in the improvisation, though of course nobody was there to record it, alas. And it must have happened multiple times. Not just one time, but it's frozen on score, and that's our only connection to it in terms of medium, with his ideas and feelings. But it's beautiful to identify with it. The opening happy expectation with the major ninth, and the dominant and the beautiful disposition stretched. First first ballade where the introduction is there to break the silence, into silence, all the people talking around in the salon. To start. Here it starts from far away to bring the theme, the aria. There's some beauty about the rhetoric. Redundancy to us, perhaps in the 21st century, where attention span is short because we are being bombarded by information and entertainments, but here, and then again. But is it a repeat of the motif, or is it just a solace, reassurance, or perhaps a restatement of the question, where am I, why am I? So if you take off the repetitivity that he chooses to express in the display of the aria, it will be very, in fact, deflated. All of a sudden it becomes almost like riding a train and seeing things going through, whenever the fact of restating it, be it in the same time or color, or perhaps in echo, or rather if the first is ultimate, the second one doubting, but is a subphrase of the general direction line of the 4 bars phrase. And the realization of the first beautiful cadence in the relative major. He does that in the first ballade in G minor also. Subdominant of F minor, and lingering on that. In 5. This staying on the subdominant 4th degree is very peculiar to him. I find that very meaningful because it's always as if in this phrase structure you have an expression of home, the hope to escape the home key, and then the lingering in another key where you're in expectation. You don't know if it's for better or for worse. And I find that in the Romantic era, literature uses that a lot, this kind of lingering, expecting, hoping, desperate sometimes. And I find that that's why we need to be able to consider this long run-on sentence in the right hand's melodic line as a flow of meaningful experience of humanity. Hope, repeat, and sometimes rise and then demise. And the difficulty for the pianist is to manage the left hand with 2 hands, but we don't have 3 altogether. If these bass notes can be pizzicati with resonance and the harmonization of the chords and the 2nd and 3rd 8th note, more transparent, more clearly distant. The fingers straight deep in the keys, and then just resolving the energy to just play the inversion. The pedal, the acoustic, the resonance almost always kills the rest of the eighth note rests. Though we have to respect, of course, the rhythmic notation. But I think some of the eighth notes rests, which are the breath to take for the human nature of producing the sound, a singing or wind instrument. It's a way to not completely finish the first thought and restart. I would like to, let's try to, and you still are going towards the aim. So when we speak about rubato, we always think, it's just playing not in tempo. For once, no metronome, just play as naturally unmeasured. But it is measured, but in pulse, not in beats. I find it fascinating because thankfully the audience never sees the bar lines visually, and they hear only the phrase. It doesn't have words, but it might as well have implied, suggested terms of endearment, perhaps. More spoken than sung. So you can let the residue resonance until the moment of break of the sound, and then we pick up again. Note reaches the fourth of the four, which is the downbeat and the appoggiatura. And the harmonization, either it's with a rhythm of eighth notes, and the bass note could be a unison, major ninth, or minor ninth, in rapport with the bass. And I think you have to suggest it perhaps with a slight delay. That's the rubato. Tastefully is difficult to define what is taste. I feel it, or I don't feel it, or I don't want to do too much, or I prefer to keep it structurally rather than taking too much freedom to indulge into the expression of this and the emotion of that and the gesture of this and the interval and the leap and the phrasing direction and the line and the articulation and the harmonic progression, and not to mention the pedaling and the acoustic and the storytelling and the aria. And you can say all these things, like I try to say them without even taking a breath. But it comes down to the fact that some notes have a little bit of delay in order to be meaningful. Like if you say, I love you, or I love you, or I love you. Without to be theatrical either, and to be intimate, but be believable. And because there's no words, then you have to space slightly. Sometimes it almost implies a delay between the bass note and the melody, but very occasionally. If not, it becomes constant. And the problem with the constant repetitivity of it is that then you start expecting it, and you lose the attention as a listener of the storytelling. I get the atmosphere, I get the direction, and I would like to know where it leads me to in the storytelling. He could have the melodic line correspond to the 6/8 meter of the left hand, and we. But he uses the hemiola of the 3/4 in the right hand. 1, 2, 3 by quarter notes of 2/8 notes, and the left hand by dotted quarters of 3/8 notes. Which bridges over the next change of harmony. And the most difficult thing to do in interpretation, besides practicing the sections, is the bridges. All those bridges are very tricky. For instance, here you can choose to have the melody take a break and then the accompaniment be very soft. And go back to it. Or use that bridge of the accompaniment to rise the intensity. 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1. A poetic counting and picking up the energy rather than every 4 bars taking it down and restarting it. So I think the bridges are important. For instance, at the end of the first sentence, restate it. Here I indulged. Here also I indulged. There is the bridge. And then the drop. Sometimes I am too indulging. But it's so fun. At least when you know you're wrong, because I am to do that. And I find that in fact the bridges in question are most difficult because you have to negotiate them in a way to merge into the new section and arrive into it in the best way, either as a surprise, which is here the G flat major section, where he uses the pentatonic of G flat major without the leading tone, obviously. And it's the antithesis of all the emotional intensity of the painful expression of the lament in the F minor. It's not major only, it's basically neutral. And out of it bursts the return of the theme, inquisitive in the minor. So of course he proceeds like Bach in pure direct root position as circle of fifths. But with trills, which are tremendous tremolos, I cannot almost say it. Tight an intense and blossoming into the appoggiatura. Most of the edition have that chord on the downbeat without the diminished fifth of the half diminished seventh. One of his favorite chords, like the E flat minor etude. The chord of anxious sadness, at least in ways that I think it means. And then, even without harmony, just the sol alone. And when it decays almost away, you go back to the coda of this theme. It seems to me like, yes, we can say aria, operatic, expressive development. It is, all of that. But when we say that, do we say anything? That the music doesn't say itself? He uses this system with the variations when he starts it right away. Two by two phrasing of the lament in the accompaniment part, like Book 2 of Bach's A Well-Tempered Clavier. All these Baroque effects, even the trill earlier, but no more as a measured organization of shaking the beat, rather than an enhancement, crescendo, vibrato on the note, singing style. But the notation remains Baroque, not the way it enhances the melodic line in this romantic era. And is it romantic? Or is it? But meanwhile, as a pianist, he has to bring out the melody with the weak fingers rather than... He has it in the top with the weak fingers, but also this way the melody is vulnerable. Bursting out like a trumpet. It's just more of a one extra breath more than the heavy accompaniment of the lament. There's a Bach cantata. Also using these thirds with the melody in the same hand, in the same key. It's just one example among many, not that he was aware of it, since I don't think they had access to any of these scores then. About the hero, the wounded hero character here in the Romanticism, not the heroic, fearless person, but somebody who's struggling to reach to the love, to the hope, to the life, to the meaning, and demonstratively doesn't shy from trying. And I think it gets to the point where he has this longer bridge now. He proceeds like Bach by sequence. You feel like it's step by step the essence of struggle. And so that, I think, is to do with that sense of heroism that is not just easy, but it has to be earned. And of course, he uses the half diminished seventh, that's his favorite chord. To me, at least. Perhaps he didn't think that, but I find that to be the case. So in fact, you reproduce the tension on each step, and you never resolve it really until he bursts on the top. It's a virtuosity, but it's not the virtuosity to show off. Well, it could actually be also slightly vain anyway. And then in canon. And then all of a sudden he interrupts all that to enter in some kind of chorale. So try to teach that and make sense of it. Because if you do it too early, then you cut down the energy that you build up so intensely. And if you stay in the flow, then you don't calm down early enough. But you don't have the choice anyway as a performer, you have to play his bars. And so if he arrives here with the then in A major, you calm in G minor, which is anyway in B flat major. And then you bring it to a halt. And you have again a moment to pause and observe and use this moment for introspection. But if not, you have to deal with it with the early decay. And then it starts. The lyrical element. The sentence is still not finished. Here it restarts. So that's a lot of delay appoggiaturas, accacciaturas, and hemiolas, and suspensions, and run-on sentence. Capture the moment. Don't let it escape. It's so precious. And of course he indicates, or his publishers indicate in tempo, which means basically no rubato. And of course one needs to also, as a teacher especially, not allow the student too much zigzagging in the rubato, because then the exaggeration will become obvious when the pendulum swings very widely. It's a never-won battle with the rubato. You have to have a main direction. Then you delay each note of two. And then feel that this is a flow of rhythmic, in a way, ritenuto. And you add a little bit of delay for the leap of the sixth. Begins on do. But he really restarts here. In a 6/8, it's easy to stay too much on the quarter and then shorten the eighth note long, short, long, short, long. And if you do short, long, then you give the impulse in emphasis on the short note. And it becomes bumpy. And if you want it to be totally flowing and flying, actually. Still not finished. And keep that cradle at 6/8. English, while the secondary voice plays eighth notes, demands not to play diminished too much at the end of the phrase. Rather, would have been natural to be up, but to build up while dropping, and then allowing this under to be heard, but in the shadow of the decaying long note. When you have the two voices between the soprano dropping and the tenor rising, you feel like there is a motion for almost hugging together the two parts from distant middle area, and many repeated notes between the outer parts. And the problem often in Chopin is that the middle voices are so beautiful, and you go, and you should say yes, but it's secondary. Becomes too busy because the phrase is not by beat, it's by group of beats. And you wonder, why did he do the switch harmonizations to repeat all the redundancies of the common tones? Probably the decay of his piano. But today we could hold them, but then we won't be playing the text, in which case we'll get excommunicated by your text. And you still hear the resonant sounds and still hear the moving sounds, and so you have the sense of idle movement. But to repeat them without to cut the flow. You have to repeat it inside the key before it's lifted fully. In hope that your touch will allow this not to be a whole or not repeat, which will be, if you especially try to speak to the intimate of the inner voice and just observe. In trance of expression, of just listening to the combinations of the sounds of the melody with the harmony, contemplatively. But in fact, the 6/8 obliges you to constantly cradle forward. And he uses an arpeggio sign for this. What does it mean? A grace note plus an arpeggio? It means delay the meaningful note. I want to tell you that. But without interrupting, while delaying, and perhaps he chose which one he wanted, and specifically, not randomly only, because if not, it would be... Of course not. So you have to make sure that you delay slightly while keeping the track motion. I think that the more I teach, the more I play, the more I rediscover what I learned, the more it reveals itself differently. Sometimes surprisingly, sometimes almost getting me out of the stability of my supposed knowledge of it, and to allow yourself to be shaken in your roots of your core of your years of supposed to be knowledge. And I don't say that pejoratively, because it is knowledge after all. But the gift of keep on giving in this kind of music is that it's almost talks to you while you play it. Of course, you play it, so you talk by playing it. You impulse it, and you feel like you let yourself be guided by it. It's a difficult thing to explain, but I think it's a bit like a conductor in an orchestra duality, but by yourself. You push, you pull, you wait, you hope, you delay, but you keep the track, you sing, but you organize the harmony, the pedal, the rhythm, the pulse, the flow. You have to allow a certain sense of abandon that is not only rhythmically sometimes disrupting the structure, but also it's necessary for the human statement. Contrapuntal harmonic texture obliges for voicing to the detriment of most of the heavy, easy fingers to play loud, with the weak fingers to sing. Much weight, you crush your wrist, and if you support with the palm, you have the freedom from the elbow to be sort of a suspension, like in a car suspension. So to have a production of a blossoming sound that is not harsh, but it's also with an indentation of forward, as spoken with articulation, like you sing with pronunciation, enunciation. Like Beethoven's Fifth also. Here he is insisting. The repeated note insisting in the Romantic era, obviously Beethoven inaugurated, chronologically. That insistence gives that pleading to the melodic line more power, and at the same time more reserved expression. You don't want to burst all your feelings at once in public because it would be indecent. But also you don't want to hold them back, because then you would be indifferent. And how to find the right tempo with the right voicing, with the right pedal to just juice enough the harmonization without to blur. Of course, you play through it many times until you realize, and then of course you practice it. Dotted rhythms or hold and poke. And of course it takes away all the feelings, but you work only on the industry of playing, the technique for the technique. And then you still have to re-enter it in the holster and say, okay, now I'm going to coat it into the meaning. The pedal. Follow the decaying sound, the secondary voice rising, the repeated notes in the lament in the middle. If not, it becomes here, this, and that, and you have to be able to follow all of them in a flow, in a direction, almost like as if it's a river, and you can feel the motion more than the detail. grace notes are nobody knows how to play because it's not rhythmed. Therefore, you can play them virtuosely. Alla Paganini, or just let it flow in this kind of daydream, but not rush, like a harp. The pedalings, they're so subtle, half shaking or fully on. But depends on the acoustic, the resonance, the sound. You're not responsible for the architect of the building in which you play, but for the feet which you organize the resonance with. And then something comes out. Probably not like you imagine it before you play, but you deal with the unexpected and you make sense of it as if it's planned. In which he reproduces the pattern has another mood, character, meaning, significance, and these canonic delays and imitations are almost like the wandering soul. Where am I going? At some point, obviously after 2 reproductions and a half of the pattern, and we goes back to the aria. I think that this is what the interpretation has to translate in its fake improvisatory factors. Obviously it's not improvised, it's all written out, detailed and published, and we all should scrutinize the detail, but in a flow of a moment, on the moment you can express it differently, because it just, you realize the sweetness of B flat minor, or the bitter sweetness of A flat major, or the hope of this and that, and it brings you to a point where you stop thinking analytically in tonalities, in affects, in all this kind of lingo, and you just feel the emotional burst of expectation or drive. Until the next variation after the little bridge, again the bridge. The agitation is so Chopin, so Chopin. More notes in the right hand than the left hand can manage, and so they mostly align, but not really, and shouldn't. So with the waves of groups of 2 times 3, and the right hand 3 times 2. And he even overlaps with the accompaniment as if the wave goes over the melodic line. But he doesn't want this. Well, perhaps he did. When you get to the point where as a composer you intertwine it so much, is that you want to perhaps give it also that aspect, and it reveals itself differently every time. If not, he would have just fragmented it clearly on the different ranges. Thankfully not, but just to say. Again, the bridge of this middle 2 modulation. Half chromatic, overlapping legato, no rubato. legato and straight into the down note of B flat compared to the waves. As Chopin was supposedly saying, my right hand ignores what my left hand does. Well, not really, because if not, we'll derail totally the track. But in a way, we have to allow it a certain amount of divagation, which is nice, actually. It feels good, especially the 2 against 3. So after a final D-flat major section, which would be the deceptive cadence in C minor, F minor. Do we pedal octave scales? No. Do we finger pedal? Do we emphasize the thirds? Do we play the thumb not too flat? We just play it on the edge of the key. Dramatically. I should be more careful not to always let so much indulgence. This is, I don't believe it. I don't like it. I don't understand it. Rather, I don't know what to do with it. I think I should say I don't understand it, not I don't like it. It's more that all this subtlety of patterns, semi-chromatic with the rhythmic patterns, and all of a sudden he switches to an etude. I used to do more decorative. Because it reminds me of the 12th etude of Opus 25. Here it is. Here it is. This could be the notational fact, because probably he improvised something more elaborate. And he notated it more simplified. Most likely the time people were expected to improvise upon the canvas without to betray. But that was way before text. So perhaps we have to accept to play, of course, like it's written. And rise that from the more subtle rising. Avoid the sort of like edit point imaginarily when you play. That's to be avoided for sure. Has to evolve into that. So the scales into arpeggios, the arpeggios into accelerando, and the accelerando into chords. A very fast succession of secondary dominants galore. And I think that nobody can hear it in real time in terms of the analytical harmonization after we had such a slow amount of harmony change in the opening dreamy section. It is built up buildup of intensity. It's almost like as if the brain is overflying, or the heart is beating faster than it can. And then if you stop by groupments, you sort of explain who is the secondary dominant of whom, but it has to be played in a flow of staccato, well, flow is not the word, but sequence. He says stretto and crescendo. Could be a virtuosity of keyboard harmony compared to virtuosity of the arpeggios fingering. But in any case, he loves, and he does a lot of that, do these drastic interruptions of mood that almost some kind of artistic revolted anger. If it's held over or not, the calm before the storm. Perhaps those chords were meant to be also arpeggiated. Hopefully not. But it is striking to manage to find a way to bring to the edge of the burst of excitement. There you go. And then all of a sudden, tempest. Thankfully, he didn't think, at least in the score, to add the bridge of the opening theme. Sometimes they're too obvious. Perhaps we can speculate because we're outside of the time frame when it was played or taught or performed by him or his people in his time, and they didn't know that we will try to unveil it and to play it again, and it means to us so much outside of the context of the time period. Well, I don't know. That's exactly what it is. I don't know. I hear, I feel, I'm convinced while I do it. When I think about it, I watch, read, and hear, and suggest, and try again. This fingering, this phrasing, this pedaling, but it's no more spontaneous. Perhaps the best is to do full circle and go back to the spontaneity after having thought about it. He doesn't have more probably keyboard to finish, and then he drops down. That's also a little bit of the idea of the wounded hero vulnerability, is that the peak of the arrival at the end of the coda is in a dropping pattern. The heroic would be rather here he in fact is defeated while victorious. Totally convinced of the authenticity of these last few chords, but I guess one needs to put a closure formally, though I find it more meaningful when it finishes like this, because it's in the real sense of romantic era that you express yourself beyond the form and above the form, and you break the form. But in fact, it's all about the feeling, the meaning, rather than the formal a group of elements, symmetric or others, in which you embed it. But it's not a big deal, because at that point, if it's a good performance, people already applaud, like arias in operas. And if not, well, it's not a big price to pay for such a subtle ballade, except those last chords. And what else could it be, right? Serves me right. They make me cough. Frédéric. Who are you? He thinks of me. Nobody. It's a fantastic feeling to play music of a dead composer who is so alive when we play him. Thank you.